Once again, underground agent X-47 stalks through the privet hedges of reality, attempting to find the completely definitive clue. The clue that will give us the key and the answer to the whole miserable mystery. X-47 strikes again, by George. X-47 arrives on the scene, casually swinging his Malacca cane, twirling his silk-lined cape, his eyes sparkling with mischievous delight, as once again he reports another straw in the wind from the vast maelstrom of 20th century life. You ready for it, gang? You're prepared? Well, not more than 15 minutes ago, I saw a sight which I could not believe. You know, I've seen a million sights in my life. But this is the kind of sight, and I'll have to prepare you before I tell you about this sight. To begin with, you have to appreciate and know a little about automobiles to understand thoroughly this particular strange, surrealistic vision which suddenly popped up before me. Unsuspecting, there it was. And I just want to go on record as putting this down in a form where later on they will hear and they will say, my God, was it really like that then, back in the 20th century? Well, I'm walking along a busy thoroughfare-type street, you know, preparing to come to this studio, the way Bob Hope was constantly coming to the studio and constantly encountering strange stories on the way. One time when I was on the way to the studio, I met this man. Well, I am walking along, you're just looking at the scene. The sky is over there, you know. Everything is pretty normal. And I see, pulled up by the curb, an automobile that was an incredible vision. I mean, it was, the kind, and I'm an old automobile fan, and so I couldn't help but look at it. It was the first one, probably one of the very few in the entire world that had the characteristics that this car has, and it's only about 3 or 4 blocks from here. I'd love to have taken a picture. It was the only chauffeur-driven Ferrari that I have ever heard of in my life. Now, all of you, none of you, of course, you wonder what is a Ferrari? You keep thinking big Rolls Royce or something like that. Well, I'll tell you, I couldn't believe it. And now, for those of you who don't know what a Ferrari is, I'll tell you that the Ferrari is probably the closest thing in the world that is sold on the open market, over the counter, so to speak. It's a pretty opulent counter, I might add. It's probably the only automobile in the world that is really, basically, a true racing machine. In other words, this is a pretty hairy piece of business. And it is not for little old ladies to go shopping at Saks Fifth Avenue, and I can tell you that, unless they're pretty rakish little old ladies. That's all I got to say about that, who wear Harlequin glasses, and have black stockings and a lot of other things going for them. But nevertheless, there in front of this very chic shop was a chauffeur-driven Ferrari. Now, let me describe it to you. Now, you haven't heard the rest of it. This Ferrari, it was obviously an attempt to take something that has an incredible potential. Not only an incredible potential, but a very, let us put it this way, a little bit on the other side of the social fence qualities to it, to attempt to make it distinguished, to attempt to make it staid. I'll tell you what it's like. It's like getting Al Capone and dressing him in a set of mourning clothes, with an attempt somehow to disguise what he really is. And here is this Ferrari sitting there. It's about 2.5 feet tall, at the tallest. This is a car that lays down almost horizontally to the ground and is moving at about 70 miles an hour when it is standing still. This car leans forward, and if you get too close to the front end, it's liable to just reach out and bite off a hawk, that's all. Arr! That kind of a car. It's an angry shark laying there, and they had it painted a dark, rich mocha of the most dignified hue. It was very dignified. And along the sides of it, now get this one, it's about 2.5 feet tall. Remember this. It's laying there flat. It's got a racing steering wheel that looked vaguely like a combination of ebony and ivory. I could hardly tell from where I was because it was laying down. I'd have to bend down on my knees, to look into it. It's laying there, and it's about 17 feet long. It's got these huge spin-off hubs, all of them sort of kind of disguised, to look like not what it was. And on the sides of this thing were panels of wicker, like the ancient cars used to have, like the old Rolls Royces had, the wicker panels that run all the way back, by the way, to the Brougham, the Victoria Brougham days. That's where that idea came from, when they made old wagons and they made beautiful Surrey carts and one thing and another back in the 19th century. They would have them sided with this well-polished, beautifully done wicker siding. Here's a Ferrari with wicker siding. I couldn't believe it. And standing next to this thing is the chauffeur. Now, this chauffeur, of course, you'd expect him to have a crash helmet with a pair of green goggles, and one of these white suits that zipper up the front. And he's standing there next to this Ferrari wearing a pair of these knee-high puttees, these black puttees. He had a dove gray set of riding pants, the very correct, totally correct English chauffeur's costume with the black hat, and he stands there just casually sort of lounging next to his Ferrari, and the motor is running, Mike. He keeps it running because that's the way you get by without having tickets. It's like that. And it's going boom, 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 boom. And that's 12 cylinders. Let me tell you, this thing has 6 carburetors. It has 12 cylinders, double overhead chain-driven camshaft, and you could take that baby right now and drop it right down on the main track at Le Mans, and that son of a gun would have probably a top speed of 205 miles an hour. I'm not exaggerating. And it's just going boom, 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 boom. It's got 4 tailpipes just discreetly hanging out the back, and it doesn't exhaust, like your car sort of exudes it. It's literally puffing it out. You see these little puffs of that light blue castor oil smoke, and that uneven sound of a racing-tuned motor. He just sort of standing there with his little gray cropped mustache. And I waited. I wanted to see the guy that owned this, I wanted to see this. I could just see this desiccated elderly ex-playboy coming out, rakish with his 9-year-old chick on his arm. Boom, 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 boom. This thing is just laying down there. And the thing that got me about it was not one person in the crowd I'm walking along with. They did not recognize the insane dichotomy of this sight. It was what? And there in front of him was a Cadillac waiting, and there behind him was a fantastic Bentley. All these cars are there, and right in the middle of it, the Shark, and it was puffing its blue smoke back on the grill of the Bentley behind it. The Bentley is just and this Bentley just sort of looked up. If a car can look away in vague distaste. And not only that, you could also see not only was the Bentley looking away with distaste, but was looking away with vague envy. The kind of envy that dowagers feel for raucous, wild chorus girls? And this Bentley was just sort of looking up. And the other chauffeurs were all gathered in little knots talking. They were in front of this fancy hotel, this jazzy hat shop. And they were all gathered in little knots. And the one chauffeur that was not with them was, guess who? He's standing there next to that Ferrari Americano, Gran Turismo Grand Prix. It's going, una Montecinta Litorino, and it's laying it out there. 4.1 liters of totally angry, taut steel, waiting there to leap at the world as best it can do. So before we go any further, let's go with the angry people. Commercial time, gang. Well, that tops, it really does. It tops the other site that I saw on the same street, which for the purposes of argument shall be I'll tell you, it's one of the jazziest streets in the world, and it is not Park Avenue. This tops that wonderful site that I saw in the same block, one of 3 I learned subsequently in the country. It was the only time I'd ever seen one, the only time I'd ever heard of one. And there it was in front of Tiffany's one day when I was walking past, a Rolls-Royce station wagon. A station wagon. Oh, indeed. If you can imagine roughing it in a Rolls-Royce station wagon. And on the side it said Pioneer. That Rolls-Royce station wagon. Kind of it is. Of course, in a way it is. It's a pioneer in decadence. There it was, and this lady got out of it. Well, I happened to see the lady in that one. She was one of those ladies, with the gloves that go all the way up to her Adam's apple. That kind of lady. She has the long cigarette holder and the little sparkly things on her dress, and the kind of lady that just exudes a kind of rampant, aggressive femininity. And let's say acquisitive femininity. She just kind of uncoiled out of that. And I saw that sight. Now, cars and automobiles in general, I think, since we are living in an automotive age and living right in the heart of probably the most automotive country in the world, cars play a tremendous subconscious part in guys' lives. Even guys who don't like cars. I mean, let's face it, they're now controlled by cars far more than they control cars. In most cities, the pedestrian's rights are slowly slipping away. You know that in some cities on the West Coast, if you're found literally walking around 10, 11 o'clock at night in certain areas of the city, they pick you up. They'll stop you right on the street. What are you doing? And you say, well, I'm just walking. What are you, some kind of a nut? Get in here. They'll take you down to the station and look you up. Because the sane people are riding. The real people ride. And in Los Angeles, for example, you can get nowhere unless you have a driver's license. They will not honor a birth certificate. People will walk in, they want to buy something, or somewhere they have to show an identity. I've had friends who could not identify themselves with draft cards, with birth certificates, any one of the normal official Social Security cards, the really official things. But the one thing you had to have, they'd say, look, get yourself a driver's license. We can't cash your checks. I have a driver's license. Because to a Los Angelino, a driver is a real person. This is a person who's part of the world. And he has credentials. He whips out his driver's license, and there it is, got a number and all that. A non-driver is a non-person. It's like a person just somehow who's half a person. He doesn't have, if you can imagine a person who has not yet emerged from the jungle. Well, those who are out of the jungle have got the whole scene swinging. They're not going to listen to this guy who's just out of the jungle. And the non-driver in certain areas of the country is literally a non-person. Now cars have played a tremendous part in my life. I'll be the first to admit it and frankly lay it down there on the table. And I can remember my old man. One of the very first memories I have of my father is my father bringing home, he was a used car type. Now, there are two types of men. There's the used car man who only buys used cars. He thinks in terms of used cars. Whenever my father would see the new models come out, he would always see them as he looks at the paper, where they have the pictures of the new cars. He would always see them with a dent on the back end. He'd just look at the picture. He'd see them with dust on the hubcaps, and places where the side was scratched and all that, because he always saw them with the double vision of the man who was looking at the new model, but who was contemplating buying it 4 years hence. He was a retroactive buyer. And so he always thought in terms of the past when he bought a car. And I can remember one of my earliest visions of the old man is the fantastic triumphal moment when he arrived home. There was a big family celebration when he arrived with the new used car. Now, that was, the whole neighborhood would peer out and everyone was looking out the windows and all that. The old man drives up the driveway, and our first new old used car was an Oldsmobile. Now, this was not an ancient Oldsmobile. This was an Oldsmobile, And the old man was always hung on Oldsmobiles because of one reason. You'll never guess why it was. The only song he could sing was the song about the Oldsmobile. And I remember some great early images of my old man sitting in the front seat with his straw hat on, with that Oldsmobile going like mad down Michigan Boulevard in Chicago, and him hollering it out. Yeah, he really yelled it out. He said, my Mary Oldsmobile, and boy, did that thing smoke. I'll tell you, she was laying down a smoke screen that could be seen for 4 blocks away, It's got bad tappets. I can remember the valve springs going. I can remember the upholstery in the back seat sticking out in long, thin springs that one time had my kid brother hooked for over 4.5 hours till they unscrewed him. And, it's just kind of a scene, He's sitting there in my merry Oldsmobile, in my merry Oldsmobile. All right, let's go, King. My merry Oldsmobile. All right, King, now hold it there now. You know, I think we're the only country in the world that has written popular songs about cars. I don't know of any other country where they sing, "In my little Fiat Promisio." They don't do that. Even though they are very much hung on cars, for some reason. Hey, do you know that in Italy, for those of you who have never been to Italy, one of the greatest places in the world to go and look at cars, if you're a car watcher, is Italiano. The Italiano Motorissimo is really something to see. For one thing, they're very romantic about their cars. The automobile is treated as almost like a woman in Italy. And the cars have a blinding femininity about them. Throughout, as you walk around the streets in Italy, almost every other car in Italy has got flowers in it. They have little vases which stick right out in the front. They'll have a little vase right on the dashboard, right under the windshield. And every day when the guy goes to work or when he comes home or whenever it is he does this, but it's a daily occurrence, he puts in a new bouquet of fresh flowers. It sticks out there. And so you see these little tiny Fiats driving all around, and between the windows, from the front and the back windows, they have little side, those little kind of vases they used to have in the cars many years ago, a little kind of an ice cream cone-looking affair. They have flowers sticking out on the side, and then they have the front of it covered with all kinds of little gimmicks, like it's nothing at all, nothing really unusual to see a Fiat that's got a sequin-covered hood. And it's true. I'm serious. It's not at all unusual to see an Alfa Romeo in Rome, a little scat-back Alfa, a little 1.9 Alfa sitting there, pure white. You can see, obviously, it's owned by a girl, with totally velvet upholstery. The upholstering is done in velvet. I mean, real velvet, like lavender, lavender velvet. Boy, talk about sensuality. There you'll see this little lavender Fiat or Alfa Romeo or Giulietta Lancia, one of them just sitting there. And with the flowers, there'll always be little white and green foliage and flowers and vines and one thing and another, all growing out around it. And you can buy all kinds of little accessories for your car, like little chrome scallops, little things that fly up on the front there. They're not like ours, which, you get big wheel covers or you get an artificial tire cover for the back, this what they call the so-called continental thing. No, they put little scallops, or you'll get little chrome fringe that goes around the back of the thing. And so you watch these cars and you realize that they're very, very feminine and absolutely sparkling. I don't think I ever saw a dirty car in all of Italy. And the most common sight is to see guys getting out of their car up and down the streets of Rome or places like Torino, places like Florence and Venice. You'll see guys getting out of their car, and they carry with them a big feather duster. And they're dusting their car. They walk around, they dust their car, and then they come back after they've been at the office or wherever it is they're going for a couple of hours. The guy opens the car, and he takes out the feather duster that's got a great big ebony handle on it. Big feather duster, huge thing. They're a real feather duster, and it fits in a holster on the back seat. He pulls it out. He's dusting it off, and you see this distinguished gentleman with a gray derby, all jazzily cut suit. He's dusting off his car with this little thing, and then he takes out his handkerchief and he very carefully polishes the windshield, little places like that. Goes down in front, and you see him polishing the turn indicators, and he gets out the duster and the chamois. He's blowing on the hood. This little tiny car, the Tupolino, he's blowing it, and then he gets in very carefully. He straightens out his trousers. And away he goes in my little Fiat 600, in my Alfa Romeo Pianissimo, in my little Ferrari. Away he goes, and everywhere you go, they have different. One of the sights and sounds in Amsterdam, a great thing they have. Problem, if you don't know what happens to cars in Amsterdam, I will tell you immediately following the commercial. You know, Amsterdam is a city that, like no other city I know of in Europe, has a sound of its own, a very definite sound. Maybe it's because of all the canals, and maybe it's because they're lying there so low with the sea hanging on practically over their heads. You can taste the sea all over in Amsterdam, smell it, and it's kind of a self-contained city, and yet it sprawls out. And the sounds echo and re-echo, maybe because the ground is so moist and everything there. But you can hear sounds for miles around. And I remember lying in the sack there on Rembrandt Plain in Amsterdam, which is Rembrandt Plain. It's a square that's named after Rembrandt. And right there in the middle of it is a huge statue of Rembrandt. And it was about a block and a half away from where Rembrandt's house is. You know, Rembrandt's house is still there. Do you know that? The house that Rembrandt lived in is still completely preserved, and it is the house. And they have all of his stuff there. For example, they have his lithograph press there. And they have the greatest collection of Rembrandt drawings in the world in Rembrandt's house. They're just all over the wall, and they're fantastic. What a feeling it is to go into Rembrandt's house. And of course, the whole street where Rembrandt's house is one of the most ancient streets in all of Europe, and the houses and people are living in it. You know, they don't make a big deal. There's just a little plaque on the front of the house, and it merely says Rembrandt's house, and it tells when it was built. You go inside. There's a little man sitting at a desk there, and if you want it, he gives you a little folder that tells about it, and you drop the equivalent of about 12 cents in a little box. It says for upkeep. That's all. And you walk around. You can stay there all day long, and it's a wild, beautiful place. You just walk around, you see, you have the feeling of the whole thing, you know, those fantastic Dutch interiors, like Hals and Vermeer and so on. And there's old Rembrandt's house about a block away. So I really love Amsterdam. So I'm lying in my bed there at night, and you'd hear for miles around, you'd hear the sound of motor scooters. And the motor scooter is one of the big deals around Amsterdam, along with the bicycles. Bicycles are like locusts in Holland. They just go in great herds at night, about 5:30, 6 o'clock at night when it's getting to be dark out there. You know, they have a long, lingering twilight because it's a sea country. Everything is gray, and you see from light to light, you see what looks like, if you draw back and you sort of squint your eyes a little bit, it looks like great flocks, silent, moving flocks of starlings. The people ride so close together, and they're such good bicycle riders, and they seem to ride backwards and forwards, and they hover in midair. Yeah, it's eerie. They have special kind of bicycles. They're not the kind we have. They're very different types, and they're not English bicycles either. They're Dutch bicycles, and they're made for utility. They're not made for riding around in the park. They're not made for kids to play around with on Saturday. These are as utilitarian as cars are. And so they really know how to ride them, and these people sort of hover. And you can see them coming up to the light. There must be 200 of them, all in one great, dark, huddled flock, like starlings. They're talking. You hear once in a while somebody talking, and you see girls riding with boys sitting on the front and the back, and they just sort of come up to this light, and they're all hovering. They're playing the light, you see. And the light is red, so you see them coming drifting in. They drift up to it. And it's eerie because you can't, how can they maintain their balance? They're just sort of standing. They're standing, moving ever so slightly. And then the light changes, away they go. They don't change spacing or anything, an iota. They're just all in unison. They go, and then you see behind them, one block, is another crowd of starlings. And behind that crowd of starlings is another crowd of starlings. And then as you look way down, you can see the crowds get smaller and smaller, you see, because they're the last ones out of the office. And they just move in great herds like starlings in the dark. And you can hear them and see them. And, of course, the bicycle is such a utilitarian thing in Holland that they ride. You see people at night, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night when they're going out to the theater. You'll see this distinguished-looking dowager with a mink coat on. And you see this elderly gentleman with a black derby. And he's riding around a bicycle looking as distinguished, his umbrella hanging down there. And they drift by. And you hear them talking. It's as though they don't even know they're on bicycles. It's just an extension of the whole human transportation system. A beautiful thing to see, really. And the cars, naturally, play a second-rate role, really. in traffic in Amsterdam, because the big thing is the bicycle. Millions and millions of them. Well, at night, when you're lying in bed, you can hear the sounds of those little cars off in the distance. You'll hear... That's the sound of Europe to me all the time. And then you hear a sound of a guy in a motorcycle, the little motorbike. They have millions of little bicycles with little tiny one-cylinder motors on them. They're real bicycles, remember. We don't have anything like that really in the States. They're genuine bicycles, and generally these bicycles are pedaled. But they have an auxiliary motor on them, believe it or not. We think in terms of the other way, you know. And here's this little motor. Here's some guy going past with his little motor. And you lie there in bed, you hear all these things, and then once in a while you hear a guy going, of course, there is nobody in the world, I think, even including the Irish, who drinks more and consistently more than the Highlanders. They really love their schnapps, I'll tell you. I'll tell you, their gin, their orange gin and stuff. And you'll hear the sound at about 3 o'clock in the morning. You'll be lying there half awake, and you'll hear... Splash! In he goes in the canal. They drag out every night roughly 12 to 15 guys who go into the canal in their Fiat, their little, they have all kinds of little Topolino. They go in with their little Borgwarg, or whatever it is they're driving. You'll hear every night some guy will go in, and of course the canal is right there. One of the most embarrassing problems in parking there is to park your car and you're backing in, and all of a sudden, oh, wow, boom! You're in 19 feet of water. With your chick and all the groceries. This happens constantly in Holland. Speaking of groceries, let's get the stuff going here, friend. As an old hand with cars, you're constantly impressed when you go to Europe. The driving in Europe is a very different situation, and it seems like just play. The Europeans really are not really automotive people, even though they design cars and they make a big thing. They're kind of like toys to most of them. And, of course, because of that, believe me, it is worth your life to get on any of the roads in Europe, because the European driver is probably the world's, next to the Latin American. I don't like to make generalizations here, but I have driven in several places in the world, including Africa, by the way, which is insane. I won't even discuss the African driving. Believe me, that's like Russian roulette, only in reverse. It's like there's only one empty chamber in that game. You drive along a road between, say, Lagos and Ibadan, and every 27 feet there's a car upside down. They're just laying there in the woods, and nobody even bothers them anymore. They leave them there. It's just brand new cars. You'll go for miles and miles. There'll be new Volkswagens and new Consuls and new Gias and one thing and another. All kinds of things, all lined up, one after the other, laying upside down among the palm trees and among the jungle. Nobody bothers them. You wreck the car, they walk away. And as far as they're concerned, they don't understand the concept that there are varying speeds in cars. I drove with a driver. This guy I got in the car, and I hired this driver, and the next thing you know, we're whistling along a one-lane road, 97 miles an hour. I couldn't believe it. Whoa! We come to a corner, and then, whoa! And I see another car coming at us. We go, whoa, 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 whoa! And I'm sitting back there, scrunching down in the middle. I says, what irony. I've come this far in my life. I've come through the wars and all that to be killed in a head-on crash in Nigeria, in a rented Hillman, And we're whistling along, and I finally said to him, "Hey, fella, watch it." He says, "What, sir?" And I says, "Hey, where you going?" He said, "What do you mean, sir?" Whoa! We go into another screaming slide. I said, wait, I'm in no hurry. He said, what do you mean, sir? I know, sir. No hurry, sir. Whoa! And I said, well, what am I going to say here? I said, well, look, fella, hey, I want to look at the scenery. He said, very good, sir. You look at scenery, good. And, he figured the faster you went, the more scenery you'd see or something, Pretty soon you'll be part of the scenery. Well, we're whistling along there, and finally, I got him to slow down by hollering. I said, hey, I want to go very slow. very slow. There's a long pause. Very good, sir. And we're going along about 40 miles an hour, which, by the way, even at that rate, was 20 miles an hour faster than we should have been going on this jungle road. And he's going along there. Well, we're starting to inch up again. I could see as soon as we hit 40, we're now going 45, we're going 50, and within 8 seconds, we go screaming into a chandelle again. And I began to realize that he did not understand that it's like your light switch. When you turn your lights on, you just think in terms of turning the light on. You don't think in terms of turning it half on, or a third on, or a little bit on. He gets in the car, he puts it in first, he puts the foot all the way down, he puts it in second, wow! And then he gets it in high, woo! That's it, the car goes like that. That's what you just put on. When you ask him how you drive the car, you put your foot on this thing and press down all the way down. What do? You just sit there and hang on for dear life. That's the end of it. I'm telling you the truth. And so, yeah, and of course, there are roads there. I might tell you, their roads are worse in Indiana. After a while, you realize that there are places where driving has no connection with the driving in the States. Now, you go over to Europe now, and you'll find that the European driver is almost as nutty. The European driver, maybe because of his background with 87 million wars, maybe because of existentialism, possibly this is part of it. It could very well be connected with the Crusades. That might have something to do with it, Mike. Could have to do with religious zealotry. Perhaps this is also one of the reasons why Freud had to be a European. There's a distinct masochistic trait. Oh, of course, the sadism comes out too. And I would say probably the overriding characteristic of the European driver in general is self-destructiveness. Oh, yes. I don't know whether you have ever been on the Autobahn at dusk. Well, being on the Autobahn at dusk is roughly like being, I would say, 30 or 40 feet away from the front lines in the Battle of the Bulge, just about the time they decided to move forward. You have no concept of that kind of driving, I'll tell you. And any American who's gone over there and has experienced this sort of driving comes back, with the stars in his eyes. No wonder that many of these European cars have the fantastic capabilities that they have, because, in most places in Europe, there's no such thing as a speed limit. They don't know about this thing. And you get on the Autobahn, I'll tell you, one night I am driving along on the Autobahn, and I had this little German car that I rented, a little tiny one, a go-go mobile, the kind you wind up with little rubber bands and stuff in it. It's got a little rear engine. We're going along there, and the wind is blowing against me, and I'm rocking. And I got this thing going wide open. I'm going about 38 miles an hour, and really kicking it, see, and I got my foot down there, and I'm trying to push it faster, like a scooter, and I've got, and I see coming up behind me, I see these twin headlights with 3 or 4 yellow lights all around it. Oh boy, that's dangerous. When you see that, you get a little worried, and it's getting faster and faster. And I think there's a rocket coming up behind me. It's coming. It's incredible. I see it in the rearview mirror. It's coming fast. I figure this is it. This is it. He's gonna go, and I go, whoa! He goes past me, and I rock in the wake. And it's just a guy driving out with his chick, getting his, getting the blood flowing out there on the Autobahn. He's driving along in his Mercedes 300 SL, and he's got this baby going wide open, flat out, 197 miles an hour, and leaving a trail of smoke and rocket dust, man. And I coughed for 15 minutes just from the wake. Now, that's all right, huh? Now, when you see these cars, when you hear about the Mercedes let's say the Mercedes 300, Mike, which has a top speed, untuned, of maybe 125, 130, something like that, tuned for performance, and that's what many of these clowns do, that son of a gun will hit up maybe 150, 155. Now, to us, those speeds are only theoretical. A guy will have a car, he'll have a big Buick, he'll have a big Cadillac, and this thing will maybe do 110. A lot of guys in America are confused by speeds. They think that the speed on their speedometer is accurate. It is not, friend. A speedometer is a highly inaccurate instrument, and the faster you go with a speedometer, the less accurate it becomes. This is an actual mechanical characteristic of the type of speedometers that automobiles have. So if you think you're going 100 miles an hour, don't be so sure. The chances are 100 to 1 that you're not going anywhere near that. A lot of guys think, well, I can take my old 57 Ford, go 122 miles an hour. Well, you're lucky if you're doing 85, actually. Clock-timed, electronically timed, measured mile speeds. Many men, of course, I know a lot of guys are going to get mad at this right away hearing this because they love the stories that they tell at the office. Why, I had the old Buick up to 115 the other day. And they love this feeling that they're going just as fast as the guys at Indianapolis are going. But remember, those guys at Indianapolis are being timed. You're just being guessed at with that speedometer, and it's a very bad guess because the speedometers have a bad case of myopia. Speaking of myopia, here's the sales department again, friend. And so when I'm speaking of the speeds of these cars, I'm talking about the actual timed clocked speeds. This is one of the reasons why these automobiles, by and large, have tachometers, because the tachometer, of course, is a far more accurate estimation of the actual land speed of an automobile than that speedometer is. The tachometer, of course, measures the RPM, the revolutions per minute of the engine. So if you're going a certain RPM, you'll find when you're in a Ferrari or you're in one of these really fine racing, they don't have speedometers, in racing cars. When you're in a real competition car, you'll find that alongside the tachometer is a chart, and the chart tells you relative speeds per in certain gears for the speed that the motor is turning over. So if it's a 6,000 RPM, your eye travels over that, and you know that you're going 142 miles an hour in fifth gear, and you know it, and you are really doing it. And so when you're sitting there on the Autobahn, these guys go whistling past, not at the speeds that your speedometer tells you you're going on the turnpike, but let's say double the speed. Some of those guys will whistle past you at speeds which rival the kind of thing that they'll do on the flat in the straight at Indianapolis. And let me tell you, when you're driving along in a normal, just driving along in a car, and a guy goes whistling, whoa, he goes past, and he's a blur, literally a blur. Whoo! He goes past, and then, whoa, whoa, whoa! Three more guys, they're out there playing tag, and then, whoa! A great big old 1939 Bentley will go past with full bore, go 8 liters roaring out there, and she is laying down a smoke screen, and you rock like for 15 minutes like a guy in a kayak following the Queen Mary. You just rock. Well, now, when you get into this kind of life, you realize, of course, the Europeans have a totally different concept about driving than we have. And how much time do we have, Lee? Quick. 4 minutes. All right. Enough time to knock off for a commercial, and I've got a couple of other things. I want to tell you one great experience I had with a car connected with my father before we go any further. You have that Majestic record up there? Get the Majestic one up there. That we've got to have majesty in this. One of the great moments, I suppose one of the things that instilled in me forever, the feeling of terrific, I suppose you might say, admiration of and the quality of being gassed by enormous, beautiful, superb automobiles is an experience that I had one time when I was a little tiny kid, little bitty kid. Now remember, this was in the Depression. My father was struggling along. All the fathers in the neighborhood were struggling along, and half of the family was on relief. And we'd watch cars. I remember sitting on the porch and one after the other telling my old man cars. He'd love that. I knew all the cars at the age of 5 or something. I could name every last one. Willie's Knight. He'd say, yep, that's right. Essex. He'd say, well, that's very good. Terraplane. Yep, that's great. I would say, Lafayette. He'd say, I said, no, what do you mean, Dad? It was a Lafayette. He said, no, look again. That was a Nash. Oh, yeah, oh, wow. And I'm sitting there doing this whole scene, so you know what kind of a life it was. And one Saturday afternoon, my father got all dressed up and got me all dressed up, and we drove in the old Oldsmobile to Chicago to a Majestic showroom that had red velvet curtains. It had potted palms. It had tall, elderly gentlemen in striped morning trousers, white carnations in their lapel, great oaken desks, and thick carpets. There was a funereal hush, sort of as though we were in a tomb. And I'm a little kid, and I walk in there, and the man says, of course, come right with me. And we walked in through big folding French doors hung with damask curtains, and there before us my father's eyes shining, revolving on a low platform with purple, green, and amber lights playing over it, a Duesenberg supercharged S.J. Borgward Phaeton, revolving slowly in the lights, round and round, and one of the hoods was open. There was that majestic supercharged power plant. 305 taut stainless steel horses laying in there, and those great cordovan leather seats which he just revolved silently. And there in that place of worship had gathered 15 or 20 acolytes, 7 or 8 priests, and maybe 200 simple, plain worshipers like my father, who just stood there. And me clinging to his hand, he says, just look. That's a Duesenberg. You won't see many more of those. That's a Duesenberg S.J., son. Don't forget the sight. And we stood in silence for 4 or 5 minutes, and that car quietly moved on the altar, spinning in its amber light. And a tall, thin man who looked like Anthony Eden stood off to the right, his morning trousers absolutely correct, his cutaway coat spotless, stood and just guarded at the shrine. The Duesenberg S.J. was holding an audience. Oh, man. Oh. Now you see why I don't get excited over Pontiacs, Ford Mustangs. And you know, at the age of 5, you don't get over a traumatic experience that quickly like that. It's still... Speaking of traumatic experiences, gang. Oh, boy. Oh, man. The Duesenberg. Now, there's a name, even. Conjure that name. Run it over your tongue. Just try it out. Duesenberg. Yes, those are the names. Rolls-Royce. Mr. Rolls and Mr. Royce take pleasure in announcing their newest creation. Bugatti. Ettore Bugatti, Il Maestro. Run that name over your tongue. Italo Fraccini. Try that one on. Hispano Suiza. Try that one on for size, friend. Match that up against your Chevy Caravel. Hispano Suiza Eto 1050. Gran Torissimo. 142 feet long and every inch angry.